Let's turn our attention to, well, that Leave alliance, or isn't there a Leave alliance? Because, of course, we saw last week Remain parties, Liberal Democrats, Green and Plaid, agreeing a deal over some 60-plus seats across the country where whichever party had the best chance of winning, the others would stand aside for them, very much benefiting the Liberal Democrats, but benefiting also the chances of having more Remain-supporting MPs in Parliament on December the 13th. So is there any prospect of that happening with the Leave side? Let's talk to Gisela. Stuart. She's a former Labour MP. She's also former chair of the Vote Leave campaign. Good morning to you, Gisela.
Good morning, Julia.
There's been a lot of talk over the weekend, a lot of pressure on Nigel Farage, the Brexit Party leader, for him to effectively, stand down from his, he says, an offer. Many others thought it was something of a threat to Boris Johnson over the plan to have his deal, his withdrawal agreement. Boris Johnson, as Cledge said, this is a Brexit deal that all Leavers can unite behind. Nigel Farage says it's Brexit in name only. He wants a no-deal Brexit. He doesn't want to vote that. However, we have seen support for Brexit Party appearing to start to collapse. I think it halved over the last week as a result of that. More Leavers going towards the Conservative vote now. Do you think there is likely to be some sort of unofficial pact, if not an official one?
Well, whether the politicians end up agreeing, I'm going to try and do something really revolutionary here, Julia, even this early in the morning, and tell politicians to stop talking to each other and get the voters to really allow them to make up their own mind. And what I would say to anybody who's going to vote, this general election is different from others. There is one particular theme which is running through the whole election, and that's the result of the referendum, which has not yet been implemented. And if for you that is the most important thing about this general election, then I think you have to remember two things. One, only a government with a working majority will be able to deliver that. And also that with the Brexit Party, it's unlike the Green Party and the Lib Dems and the others, who are political parties that exist for a whole spectrum of reasons. With the Brexit Party, is only one issue they're pursuing, and I would say if that is the most important thing, then you need to deliver a government with a working majority, because if you don't, you really risk losing the entire referendum result. And you also will probably face another two referendums in the next year.
So for you, this is the Brexit election. There's no doubt at all there that the Labour Party are very keen on making this not the Brexit referendum, quite apart from having something of a quite confused a manifesto promise on this. And of course, today we understand they're pledging, they're going to meet to talk about their immigration policy, because there are lots of calls for a conference for there to be freedom of movement, as there is under current EU membership. Of course, this was a key issue in the Brexit referendum. What do you expect the Labour Party, you're presumably still a Labour Party member.
I am, yeah.
What do you expect that policy to be?
Well, I very much hope that they realise that one of the key things was whether, whatever your views on immigration were, people do want their politicians to have the final say over who can come in and what the numbers are. And I hope that the Labour Party realises that whilst in London there may be one particular view, for most of the rest of the country, they wanted to have that control. And if Labour only focuses on London in terms of its policies, then I think it will not be able to form a government in the future. But I come back to the general election and people who think that the EU referendum is more important than anything else. As a former Labour politician, I don't think that people who kind of think, I now vote for one of the other parties, that the dividing line is so clear that they could unseat Labour MPs. I think the key thing is to produce a government with a majority to deliver the EU referendum, and that won't happen if we vote for the smaller parties.
There is a very strong chance, though, that voters get to decide themselves what they think an election is about, and they may feel very strongly about things like Brexit, or whether it's Leave or Remain, but they also may feel very, very strongly about other issues like public spending, like their schools, their hospitals, infrastructure projects, whatever the issue is, and a lot of the focus, certainly from the Labour Party, is right now on public spending, and the Conservatives have gone on the attack over the weekend. They've been talking about this £1.2 trillion costing they've given for possibility of what the Labour manifesto might be. Now, we haven't seen the Labour Party manifesto, and we're going to talk to the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury coming up in an hour's time about what may likely be in there. But quite across the board, there has been some rubbishing of the Tory claims of this 1.2 trillion figure that actually, you're adding up virtually anything anyone who's ever been to Labour Party conference has ever said and thought was a good idea, and added it up into one policy. What do you make of those figures? Do you think those figures are fair? Do you think that saying, Labour's going to spend a huge amount of money is actually going to put a lot of voters off?
Well, I think once the manifesto's out, it's going to become slightly clearer. But I come back to the, any of the both political parties with their public spending commitments. The only thing that's going to enable them to deliver it is if the economy is performing. And if there's one big threat to the economy doing well, it is continued economic uncertainty. That is why I think we need to leave the European Union. And I think the last thing we want is another two referendums next year, which is, I'm afraid, my party is committed to.
Do you share any of the concerns of people like former Labour MP and then stood as an independent, now standing down, Ian Austin, and John Woodcock, again also a former Labour MP, that they view Jeremy Corbyn as someone who is unfit for public office and someone who is a threat to Jewish community in this country, and they have called on you're calling on Labour leavers to vote for the Conservative Party to get that majority over the Leave issue. But do you also have concerns about Jeremy Corbyn and his fitness for public office?
Well, again, whether people have to decide what's most important, and when it comes to anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, I find it really sad, and it actually makes me angry that we even have to talk about this. I think the party has not tackled this sufficiently well. And when someone like Ian Austin, who is an arch loyalist to the Labour Party, supporting for successive prime ministers, feels that strongly about something, then people should wake up and listen. And but again, people will make their own judgments. But what they see at the moment, I don't think is a very good sign for the Labour Party.
Let's turn our attention back to the general election. And my next guest, the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, lots of the front pages today full of the pledges from your party towards veterans, particularly from Northern Ireland. And as one paper put it, an end to the veterans' witch hunt. This is a plan to change the Human Rights Act to protect troops. What does it involve?
Well, first of all, it involves changing or amending the Human Rights Act so that our courts and our inquests can't be abused constantly by repeated visits by lawyers on behalf of their clients when people have already been through inquest systems and they've already been through trials. And at the heart of this is a conflict between what we'd call international humanitarian law, that's the Geneva Convention, the Hague Convention, and also international human rights law, sound remarkably similar, but one is, and that is the ECHR. And so that's meant that when our House of Lords made a ruling in 2004, that got overruled by the ECHR court to say, no, we want to extend the power of this convention. And that has allowed lawyers to constantly come back and demand more inquests and continually attack the government or the state by saying, you're not doing enough inquests, you're not doing enough investigations, which means our soldiers who go out there to defend us all, whether in Afghanistan, Iraq, or even in Northern Ireland, are constantly dragged back through the system. And I think it's time to say enough of that. If you want to continue those arguments, you're going to have to go direct to Brussels. You're not going to use our court systems to abuse that process. And therefore, we will amend the Human Rights Act if we're elected to make sure that happens.
Why has this taken so long? I mean, your party's been in power for 9 years. This has been an issue all of that time.
Well, I think, first of all, amending the Human Rights Act is, quite a brave move. And indeed, if you think in the coalition, I don't think that would have got through the coalition. I was a junior minister at the time, so it would have been above my pay grade, but that wouldn't have probably got through the coalition in the first part of the government. Secondly, I think it's been really important to gather the evidence and listen to the experts. Professor Atkins gave some really good evidence to the Defence Select Committee, and these proposals are mainly drawn from a really good cross-party, and I want to underline that, cross-party report from the Defence Select Committee this year that looked at the alternatives and looked at the options to find a way forward. There are Labour MPs, DUP, SNP, and Conservative MPs on that committee, and they came up with this. We've looked at it. Actually, there's some really good suggestions, and we want to absorb that, and if we win the election, serve our debt to our veterans and make sure this doesn't happen.
OK, well, this is on Armistice Day, obviously. This is for ex-servicemen and women. But what are you doing for the current ones? Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, is pledging to improve working conditions and pay for the armed forces if he becomes Prime Minister. He wants to scrap the public sector pay cap, and he wants to see an increase in the starting salary for army privates, better housing, and he says also creating a representative body similar to the Police Federation for servicemen and women, and support for children of forces, men and women, better access to schools and the like. What about any of these policies? It seems looking after servicemen and women after the fact, 20 years on, is one thing. What about looking after them now?
Well, the party's press release last night will have shown 4 very strong measures for the serving, and I'm as keen on the serving as I am the veterans. And I'm an ex-soldier, but I also believe that the best and the finest equipment we have in our armed forces are those men and women. So I've absolutely made sure as Defence Secretary I've looked at what we can do, and there are 4 really good things. The first one that I think is really, really important is we're going to give free wraparound childcare to all children between 4 and 11 of serving armed forces personnel, because when you're in the armed forces, your day is not as normal as other people's 9 to 5. And I think we should recognise that by making sure that if they have an after-school club or a breakfast club, that we pay for that to help men and women of the armed forces, who nowadays are usually both working, make sure that that can make a big difference. And we're going to fund, it's going to be 165 million, and we think that's a really, really key point. There's been 2 reports recently that show that's a pinch point to retention, and quite rightly we should help them out. Secondly, we've extended help to buy. So at the moment, we are going to now allow military personnel to borrow up to half their salary, 50% of their annual salary, interest-free, for deposit to buy their own home. Because if the husband or the wife is off on operational tours, there's nothing better for them to have their own home.
Okay.
Secondly, so I've got more, because compared to the Labour one, Julia, I've looked at the Labour one. The Labour one is actually riven with ideology. End privatisation, an armed forces trade union, end reliance on the private sector. There's no actual detail about how they're actually going to help our men and women of their armed forces. And then, so we're going to do also put the Armed Forces Covenant in law to make sure that when you try and go to a school, that the Armed Forces Covenant, there's a public duty on local authorities, etc., to make sure they fulfil that. So I think those are really 3 big things, plus a veterans rail card at the end of that, and protection in law to make sure we don't go after people afterwards. That's really going to make the difference, we think. And we think it's positive for the serving as well as the veterans.
As Defence Secretary, as someone who is concerned with the security of this country, are you concerned that number 10 is sitting on this report from the Intelligence and Security Select Committee, chaired by Dominic Grieve, former Tory MP? It seems an awful lot of people in the security agencies are saying they're quite happy for this report to be published before the general election, and there are allegations that this is quite a damaging report, and it's being sat on and covered up, even though it involves possibility of Russian interference in our democracy.
Well, Julia, I was a witness to that report. I've also read the report in full, the unredacted sort of classified report. I'm not allowed to comment on its details until it's finally published, but what I can say, there's about as much truth in the allegations being printed over the last week or 2 about those reports, about Russian-specific backers of part, all that stuff, as there is that, of course, Agent Cobb was an agent for the Czech intelligence, or Jeremy Corbyn. It's complete guff, what I've seen written over the last few days. I think, number 10 and PERDA, there are obviously obligations about when you can publish these reports. Those reports will be very important, but I assure you that some of the wilder allegations will be proven not to be in those reports when it's published.
Can I point out that report could easily have been published before PERDA? I'm pretty sure it's allowed to be published now. I think it had to be published then, but it could have been published then before. But the key point is, you're saying it's complete guff.
Well, some of it.
Well, if it's not damaging, why didn't the government publish it?
Well, look, It has happened for many, many reports, that these reports go backwards and forwards because they get shared with intelligence services to say what bits can you publish, what bits can you not publish. They go backwards and forwards. There's often a negotiation between the committee and number 10. If Dominic Grieve, I'm sure will be able to give you other examples where reports went longer than they should have done before they were published. That is not uncommon at all. It shouldn't be. We should be quicker. But I promise you there is no major, massive smoking gun in that report.
Easy way to solve that is to publish it. But let me take you on to a different topic now, because obviously time is against us. The Conservative Party has done the costings, they believe, of Labour policy pledges expected in their manifesto this election, though we've not seen either your manifesto or indeed the Labour manifesto or any others. £1.2 trillion, £43,000 every family. This has already been completely debunked. It's been called fake news by John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor. You've included policy pledges which, are simply things that were voted on at Labour Party conference. No reason to think they're actually in the manifesto. Even some pledges which they categorically said will not be in the manifesto. Hasn't this made the Conservative Party look a bit silly?
No, not really, Juliet. First of all, a large proportion of that is based on their 27 manifesto, which, unless Labour have announced they're going to completely debunk, I think not. We've heard
in that case, is the Tory party keeping that social care policy that was so popular at the last general election then?
Have a look. I recommend your listeners, they go online, they can read the whole dossier.
Are you saying the Tory manifesto? Are you saying the Tory manifesto this year is going to be the same as the one in 2017 with some other stuff added on?
I'm sure it's not going to be exactly
the same.
So
why do you think the Labour manifesto will be the same as the 2017 with other stuff added on?
Julia, I think first of all, you said these things are voted on conference, and therefore apparently they're not Labour Party policy. I've lost count of the time a Labour person has appeared on your show to say that their Brexit policy was voted on by party conference and that's where they make their decisions for the policy. I'm sure if you go back through all your transcripts, you'll hear the constant excuse for why Labour's Brexit policy is a sort of omelette of nonsense. It's because they always used to say on your show, look, it's perfectly clear, conference decides our policy and that is what it is. And, now they're saying conference doesn't provide their policy. We think that they have made endless and weekly and daily commitments to spending. That's not uncommon. Everyone knows the Labour Party spends its life spending other people's money until it runs out. They did it, up until 2010. They're going to do it again. And, the Institute of Fiscal Studies will tell you lots and lots of amounts they've promised to spend. It's a lot more than us. And I can tell you that it is huge figures, nationalising all our utilities without properly compensating the owners of those companies. I mean, these things are just eye-watering in scale, and all driven by ideology, just like their pledge on the armed forces. A trade union. The last thing the armed forces need is a trade union. What they need is to be properly supported by a government that believes in them, and that isn't the Labour Party.
Let's talk about this £1.2 trillion claim from the Conservatives that they say is the cost of Labour's policy pledges. £43,000 for every household, they say. This has already been criticised by, your boss, the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. He calls this a ludicrous piece of fake news. Which bit of it's fake?
Well, it's the old chestnut from the Tories, isn't it? If you don't have your own policies, you don't have your economic policies or policies which are in tatters, go on the attack for the Labour Party. So we will be publishing our manifesto and we'll be publishing our Grey Book. Remember, we've talked about the Grey Book before. This is our proposal for funding Britain's future, and they'll come out in due course.
When you say in due course, when are we going to see them?
Well, we'll be seeing them after when the manifesto is published, which all manifestos will be published in about 10, 12 days' time. So that will lay out all our policies as a package. You'll have heard of some announcements already, inevitably, but as a package, they'll come out and they'll just show that what a load of codswallop it is that the Tories are talking.
Well, we were speaking to the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, a few moments ago, and he was saying, look, this costing's based on a lot of things that you were promising your 2017 manifesto and things that have been voted on at party conference in the last year, and also things that have been spoken about by some of your your party's front benches. How much of the 2017 manifesto is going to be contained in the 2019 one? Presumably, as someone who deals with the financial side of things as Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury, you've seen some of those costings. Can you give us a rough idea? I mean, we spoke to you last time and you mentioned that, you thought the tuition fees pledge was still there. What else is still going to be there?
Well, talking of being shy, I think I'll be shy in responding to that question because you'll have to wait till the manifesto and the full costings actually come out. But it's inevitable that there will be some repeats of what we had in the 2017 manifesto, which was a very progressive manifesto. So, yes, tuition fees are still in there, and there'll be other costings and other expenditure plans or proposals which are based on the need to invest in the country. So, for example, Julia, we spend half the amount of capital in our NHS than our European competitors, our European comparators do. So that's an example of where we're going to have to try and catch up in a whole range of areas that have been left bereft for so many years.
Let's also talk then about some other policies. By all accounts, according to the Guardian newspaper today, your party members, senior figures, are going to be meeting today to discuss what your migration policy is. I find it extraordinary. We're just weeks away from an election and we don't know what Labour's migration policy is. But of course, at a Labour Party conference, there was a series of radical policy motions, the Guardian described them, on issues like migration that were adopted. There's going to be some pressure on Jeremy Corbyn to incorporate effectively a pro-migration policy allowing free movement. Are we going to have a pro-immigration unlimited free movement from the EU, whether or not we vote to remain or to vote for a Labour Brexit deal in the event of a Labour victory?
Well, what we're going to have is what we've said for a long time, a fair immigration policy, a policy that fits the needs of the country. And we've already had in the past with the Conservatives setting these targets, these arbitrary targets of whatever it was, 200,000, 250,000, or rather having a net immigration of 250, 200,000, and then the government saying we wanted it down to tens of thousands, which hasn't happened. So anybody who starts to put figures on these things is sort of going to go down a path that they're not going to be able to return, and we'll have a fair immigration policy which will fit the needs of the social and economic needs of our country.
Oh, well, you say that, but that's not quite the same as having unlimited. It's one thing to have, say, a points-based system and to say, look, we need more fruit pickers or we need more, highly qualified NHS workers. That's quite different, isn't it, from saying, come on in, the door's open.
Well, we're not saying come on in. Inevitably, within parties, people have different views about what policies should be.
The party conference voted for free movement, didn't they?
Well,
so it's not going to be free movement?
Not strict. I mean, look, Julia, it isn't as simple as that. I mean, I know we try to get these sort of policies down to a binary position. We want this or we want that. We don't want this or we don't want that. We live in a very complicated society, and we have to attune our policies to fit the needs of the society, and that's what we'll do. We'll have a fair immigration policy which will reflect the social and economic needs of the country. So, for example, let's talk about the NHS. 25% of clinicians, in effect, in the NHS are non-British. What do we do about that? It may well be that we need more. It may well be that we need less. Let's look at this rationally.
May well be we could train up more British people who want to do those jobs, but are currently barred from the limited places for nursing and medical school.
Absolutely, and we've made proposals to get rid of nurse bursaries or to introduce nurse bursaries, to get rid of the government's current proposals where nurses have to pay to train. So that's an example of what we're doing as well, and in relation to the expansion of places in medical skills. So these are all matters that interlink. And as I say, rather binary and sort of yes/no answers to questions are all fine.
But hold on a minute, it is a yes/no. You can have a policy to have any particular controls on immigration, or you have no controls at all. Will there be or will there not be a policy for free movement from the EU in the Labour manifesto? That is a yes/no.
Well, you'll have to wait to see what the manifesto.
Do you know what it is?
No, I'm not right. Well, I don't write the manifesto. I'll be there when we make our decisions. We make our decisions about what will be in the manifesto. The end of this week on Saturday, where we have our Clause 5 meeting, where all those views and ideas will come together, and that will form the basis
Okay.
That meeting will form the basis of what our policies will be. So as I said, you just have to watch this space.
We'll have to wait. We'll have to speak to you again. What about, there's some plans that have been reported in, I think it was the Sun newspaper over the weekend, that if and when, if there is a election defeat again for Jeremy Corbyn, after 2 defeats, that he would stand down. And in his place, I know obviously you're fighting to win the election, you're not looking at a loss, but in the event of a loss and he stands down, that there will be two co-leaders, one who would support Brexit and one who would support Remain. Is that true?
Look, number one, I don't read the paper you referred to, so I don't know what it said.
Well, I've just told you what it said.
Well, yes, precisely. You couldn't believe a word it says. Look, at the end of the day, you're right, we are in the middle of a general election, and I'm not going to start to speculate what will happen after a general election when this is a general election that we're seeking to form a government. So I'm not going to go down that path. We're out to win the election and then and transform the United Kingdom's economy.
We're out to win the election, and you need candidates to stand in political candidates in those constituencies. But you're losing quite a lot. A lot of them are having to stand down over things that they have said in the past or done in the past, particularly in relation to anti-Semitism. One of your shadow ministers, Dan Carden, there's a recording of him singing, instead of Hey Jude, the well-known Beatles song, on a bus journey, singing Hey Jew. Is that acceptable?
Well, Dan Carden has completely and utterly categorically denied that's what happened. I've got no reason not to believe what Dan Carden said. And
there are quite a lot of people who claim that they were witnesses to it.
There are lots of people who claim that it didn't happen. Look, as far as I'm concerned, we're at a general election where every single item is being chucked at the Labour Party, which would try to slay us. Why weren't these things brought out soon? If these matters were so important, and they are important, why weren't they brought up before? Why weren't they tackled? Why weren't they addressed and publicised before? It's strange, isn't it?
Well, you know why, don't you? You know a lot of these people, they sit on these things until there's a general election. That's what all sides do.
Well, yes, but that's the point, because these are so crucial and so important to the political future of the country and the individuals' political views. Why aren't they brought out at the time? And it just sounds like a terrible hypocrisy to be saying these are very important. Oh, by the way, we sat on them for 6 or 10 or 12 or 15 or 18 months, or God knows when it was supposed to have been.
Just finally, a brand new poll has just come out, a YouGov poll carried out on a Friday, asking people about the support for various different policies of the Labour Party. The 50% tax on people, the highest earners, over 124 grand a year, 64% support. The 45% tax on people earning 80 grand, noticeably a grand more than MPs are paid, 60%. Renationalising rail, 56% support. Putting workers on boards, 54% support. 53% support wealth tax, 50% support nationalising water, 45% support nationalising gas. Given that so many of the policies that your party has are incredibly popular, and they were again in 2017, do you not think your best bet of getting elected would be if you ditched the person who is currently the most unpopular leader of any political party in, frankly, living memory in Jeremy Corbyn, given that your policies are actually remarkably popular with the public at large?
Well, no, because the policies that we brought forward in 2017, we started behind 24% in the polls. As Jeremy Corbyn gets out, he got that back, and there's absolutely no reason why that's not going to happen again. And I think our policies are popular. They're not popular for popularity's sake. They're popular because they're good policies and they're progressive and transformative policies, and that's why people actually like them. And I'm determined, as are all my colleagues, to get out, make the case for them over the next 4 to 5 weeks, and make sure that we have a Labour government that can actually implement those policies, those popular but transformative policies.
Let's talk to the Liberal Democrat candidate, former Tory MP, of course, former leadership candidate for the Tory party, Sam Gyimah, who joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, you're here to talk about a Liberal Democrat policy announcement today to create what you're calling an ambitious £10,000 skills wallet for every adult. How does this going to work?
So the thinking here is, look, no one now stays in the same job in the same company for life. We all know that there are many challenges around automation that workers have to deal with. And so what we will make available is £10,000 from the age of 25, 4,000 at 25, 3,000 at 40, 3,000 at 55 in a wallet for people to spend.
When you say in a wallet, what do you mean? We're not going to have that cash just sitting there, are we, on the sideboard?
It's in a, let's call it a training account for people to spend on training to improve your skills, because it's by improving your skills that you can actually improve your wages and do better in life. Your employer can top up the money that is in this account, but by creating these wallets for people, it gives them control over what sort of training they do to improve their prospects in the workforce.
And again, we have seen an issue, haven't we, that people perhaps many years ago would have expected, you start, you leave school, you go and do a job, you train in that job, and that's the job you have for life. Whereas now people are probably going to change jobs, definitely, but change career perhaps 2 or 3 times over a longer working life, and this will enable people to do it. I mean, a lot of people...
And there are jobs that are coming that don't even exist.
Yes.
There were jobs that 10 years ago didn't exist that now exist, and where are you going to get the training from? So it is something that for us to be competitive as a country, but also to make sure that people are competitive in the workforce and can get higher paid jobs, it means we've got to invest in skills and training. Okay. That's what we're doing, and we're giving people ownership and control of the money to do so.
And what's the cost of this?
The cost of it is 1.6 billion. We assume there will be 25% take-up of this, and we will fund that by increasing corporation tax from the current 17% to 20%. Now, a lot of employers, CBI, they're always and employer organizations are always telling us politicians how they don't have enough workers with the right skills. So in doing so, they will be sharing in the cost of getting the right skills for their employees to make them productive.
And this is 1.6 billion a year, but again, you're assuming only 25% take up in any year or over a lifetime?
Sorry, what do you mean?
I would say it's when you say 25% take up, that will be over an entire lifetime. Only a quarter of the people who are eligible for this are going to take this up.
Yeah, because there will be people. If someone qualifies as a doctor, for example, they probably wouldn't need to do this, and so different people are in different types of jobs. So it's 1 in 4 of the people who are actually working that will take it up.
All right. I mean, again, I think that will be a very popular policy with an awful lot of people who were concerned about, as I say, the ability to change jobs and things. We all know, of course,
that in the future. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you say it's a popular policy, Julia.
Well, I don't know it's a popular. It would seem to me it looks pretty sensible just on the face of it. I'm not giving any party political opinion. It seems to be pretty sensible.
Thank you.
But this is the thing. There's a lot of talk at the moment about Labour Party policy costs and what they're spending and what they're pledging to do, and indeed the Conservatives as well. And a lot of talk about public services and spending on that. You, of course, I mean, to a certain extent, like the Tories, want this to be an election about Brexit, because your main number one policy that people know the Liberal Democrats for right now is that you are opposed to Brexit. You would revoke Article 50 if you got a formed a majority, and you want a second referendum if you don't. Do you still think this is going to be the Brexit election, or is that actually falling away? Because we are seeing the vote for the two major parties sort of coalescing. Brexit Party losing votes to the Tories. Your vote isn't perhaps, given it's supposed to be the Brexit election, it's not going up leaps and bounds, despite the fact that Labour have a pretty unclear remain light Brexit policy. You should probably be doing a little bit better by now, in which case, are you worried that this election isn't going to be about Brexit?
No, I mean, Brexit is our number one policy because it affects everything that we do as a country for the next few years. The starting position for all of our policy positions is what happens with Brexit. So, that if you deliver a damaging Brexit, then the idea that you can meet any of your spending pledges is fantasy, which is where the Conservatives are. You're right to say that in voters' minds, Brexit is an issue, but it is much wider. And we have a much wider platform. On Saturday, we announced our pledge for 35 hours of childcare, free childcare for parents after 9 months old. That is to support working families. That is a non-Brexit policy. I've just been discussing with you the skills wallet, and there is a lot more to come. The difference is we know that we can afford it, because if we remain, there will be a £50 billion Remain bonus, and that will fund our campaign pledges. That is why what we are calling for today is for the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, to cost the manifestos of all the parties. Because what is happening is, on the Conservative side and the Labour side, as you said, they've worked out that if they don't want to talk about Brexit because it's too complicated for them, they want to talk about splashing the cash. But the finances are in a mess. Some of these figures are bogus figures, and we want an independent body to look through the manifestos and tell us exactly what is happening.
Well, are you sure that your £50 billion Remain bonus claim would stand up to that scrutiny by an independent body? Because I think lots of people might question that.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies, which is kind of the body that always looks at the budget and sort of gives the yay or nay on any budget, has come out and said it is a reasonable assessment of what it is. So it's already been scrutinized. If anything at all, the 50 billion is on the conservative side of the estimates rather than the high end. So there could be more in our case, whereas in the Conservative and Labour case, what you're looking at is huge damage and hoping that they can just come up with these pledges. One of them crosses the line into Downing Street and then deal with the consequence afterwards. But what we're saying is don't just take our words for it. People say politicians will say that at election time, won't they? Let's get the OBR to look at all the manifestos and tell the public what exactly is happening.
All right, just finally, I saw the newspapers at the weekend that your party leader, Jo Swinson, has decided to ditch the rather controversial, I suppose, a slogan from the European elections, a B word I'm not allowed to say on air, otherwise I'll be told off by the regulator, Ofcom, a B word to Brexit. She's decided to ditch that. A lot of people are saying she's had a sense of humour failure, but is that actually recognition that it's actually a pretty offensive slogan to a lot of people?
Well, I mean, you say it's offensive, but in Kensington, where I'm standing, Liberal Democrats got 36% of the vote. Brexit Party got 17% of the vote. Tories and Labour got 12% of the vote. Nationally, for the first time, we beat the Conservatives and the Labour Party in a national election for about 100 years. But this is a new election. Our campaign is Stop Brexit. It's 2 words, much better than 3 words.
Let's turn our attention back to other election matters, and we're joined now by Anne Widdecombe, Brexit Party MEP, who joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning. You all right there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I got a slight cough.
Right, there's a press conference today from Nigel Farage and other leading figures in the Brexit Party. It promises, they say, to be an important announcement. We're still a few days away from that deadline for those all of your 600 candidates out of the 650 seats to put their names forward for different constituencies. Should we expect some sort of reverse ferret, some sort of climb down from Nigel Farage and a pledge not to stand candidates in every seat in Britain?
I don't think it's a question of a climb down. And Nigel offered a pact. Boris has refused. Nigel's obviously now got to consider what to do. It isn't just a few days away. Nominations may close on Thursday, but they open tomorrow. So I think it was always inevitable that we were going to hear his final decision today.
OK, so do you have any idea what the final decision would be?
No, I don't. I mean, if I did, I have to admit I wouldn't be sharing it with you. But actually, I'm telling the absolute honest truth when I say no, I don't.
But isn't it interesting that even one of his own MEPs doesn't know what Nigel Farage is planning to do? Is it a bit of a one-man band and he gets to decide it all?
Not at all. I mean, we're very disciplined. As I said, if I did know, I wouldn't be telling you.
All right.
I think Fleet Street has been quite admiring of how disciplined we are because if there is a conference to come, we don't leak beforehand. OK,
well, one could argue, you said Nigel Farage offered a pact to Boris Johnson. Of course, that pact was basically an offer that was impossible for Boris Johnson to accept. Basically, ditch the deal that you just negotiated with EU27, that you just managed to get a slight majority in the second reading in the House of Commons, which your whole party is coalescing around, ones that are left, who haven't left the party. That was always a deal that he knew that Boris Johnson wouldn't agree to. So it was more of a threat than a promise. But isn't the real issue, what's going on, is that actually we've had apparently some behind-the-scenes, fairly senior talks, but we've also seen the Brexit Party vote is almost halved, according to one poll.
Well, first of all, Julia, I like the fact that you have just concentrated on the first offer that Nigel made, which was indeed you must ditch the deal. The second offer, and therefore the most recent offer that he made, was that he would drop that requirement if Boris agreed that he would immediately seek a simple free trade deal on WTO terms. And rather than have 3 years of protracted negotiations. So just let's get it very clear. what the final offer was. And as for halving, the polls have been up and down. We know from our own polling, that we're doing very well in the big Labour heartlands, which haven't voted Tory in about 100 years, but are prepared to vote for us. That was our offer to Boris, that we would take those seats for Leavers.
But the polling nationally, now we know, of course, this election is going to be decided in individual constituencies. There may be a lot of tactical voting and the like. But we've seen the Remain alliance already being formed. There's Liberal Democrats, Greens and Plaid. Of course, Greens and Plaid are much smaller parties than the Brexit Party on the polling right now. Liberal Democrats, though, shoring up their vote in some of those constituencies. We're not seeing that, as because we've just been discussing, between Brexit and the Tories. Are you worried, as someone, you left the Conservative Party, now the Brexit Party, is someone who came back into politics to help deliver Brexit, that actually the one thing, the raison d'etre of the Brexit Party is actually possibly at risk by the Brexit Party standing? Is that a dilemma for you personally?
No, first of all, as I say, you have just pointed out that the Remainers are forming an alliance. Therefore, there was an enormous argument for the Leavers to do the same thing. But Boris rejected that opportunity. So far, at any rate, as far as we know, he won't form an alliance with us. So that is the first question. You must put that one to Boris rather than to me. But secondly, do I worry about jeopardising Brexit? No, I don't, because you talk as if the only people we're going to be fighting are Tories. That is not so. We're also going to be fighting big time in the Labour seats, because that is where Remain MPs very often are representing constituencies who voted between 60 and 70% leave. Now, it is quite wrong they should be represented by Remain MPs. That's where we'll be concentrating. So don't talk to me about halving up the Tory vote.
If you had to predict right now what you think will happen on December the 13th, we're not looking at the Brexit Party sweeping the board realistically, are we? What's the best bet of how many seats you think you could probably get?
Well, I'm not going to get into seats predictions, but what I do know is we are perfectly capable of holding the balance of power. Perfectly capable of doing that and delivering Brexit that way. So we don't have to win an outright majority, which I agree with you, realistically we're not going to. We don't have to win an outright majority in order to have an enormous parliamentary influence on Brexit.
Well, no, that is absolutely crucial. And again, even in previous elections, the Brexit Party didn't even need to win any seats at all to have a massive influence. That's the reason why we ended up getting, the UKIP, predecessor, actually a referendum in the first place. And yet, there is a lot of this is going to depend on Brexit Party candidates standing aside. The Tory Party have said they are not going to be standing down their candidates. They're a far bigger party, on give or take somewhere between 35 and early 40%. They're not going to stand down their candidate. It's going to have to be the Brexit Party to stand down, isn't it?
Well, isn't it interesting that the Liberal Democrats haven't taken that line with the Greens, for example? And so if Remainers can form an alliance with big and small parties, there's no absolute reason why the Leavers couldn't have done the same thing. But that was a judgment call for Boris, and he's made it. I would say there is this enormous sense of entitlement in the Tory party that, they alone can stand. And they won't do deals with anybody else. Well, fine, let's just see what happens. And if there's a hung parliament with a Brexit party with a balance of power, they'll nobody but themselves to blame.
Right now, though, let's talk about the outstanding achievement this election so far, which seems to me to be finding as many naughty things, offensive things, possibly anti-Semitic, possibly poor taste jokes, that for the candidates that are trying to stand in this election have said, who are now becoming ex-candidates. They've ranged from a Labour Party shadow frontbencher singing this song. He's denied this, although there are a number of witnesses to it, along to the famous Beatles tune, Hey Jude, singing Hey Jews. Yes, really. Comments from a Tory MP regarding rape and how women might make themselves safe. Another Tory candidate, Keir Marshall, resigning about comments he's made about food bank and about feminism. And again, a whole collection of anti-Semitism scandals surrounding Labour Party candidates. But should we be making a case out of every single message, remark, posting online that has ever been made by a future candidate? And should that be something that renders them unfit for public office? Let's talk to the editor of Spiked Online, Brendan O'Neill. Good morning to you.
Hi, Julia.
I have a funny feeling that depending on people's party political persuasion and depending also on whether or not they happen to agree or disagree with what someone might have said, they'll take a different line in each example. But the thing is, there's always going to be someone who's going to find something that someone has said offensive, in which case, are we going to actually run out of people who can stand for office eventually?
Well, that's the worry. I mean, some people refer to this as offence archaeology, where you go digging through people's past. You basically look through their whole Twitter history to see if they've ever said anything un-PC or a bit colourful or a bit mad. And then you use it against them to cast them out of public life. I think it's a really low form of politics, and it's really cowardly and censorious. And what it really is, it's about avoiding substantial issues of policy and substantial issues of politics, and instead just kind of sweeping people aside because they've said something that you found disagreeable. It's a really cheap way to conduct public life.
Yeah, well, I was talking about the... let's not name any of the candidates here. Let's just go through them generally, because there was a Tory candidate and he was accused of making offensive comments about rape, and he was just talking about how, at no point did he say, it was okay at any point ever for a man to rape a woman. At no point did he say that. But he simply did say that he thought that in scenarios where certainly date rape cases where women were, naked in bed with a man, and he decides not to stop when she asked him to, that they perhaps might have been safer not getting into bed with a man naked who they'd planned not to have sex with, which I thought was frankly rather sensible advice. There was also a situation where a Labour candidate was talking about some joke, again, perhaps a little slightly bad taste joke, but nevertheless no more than that, about the risk of it's Everton and Liverpool derby, and women will have to be packing their suitcases tonight because there's this risk, of course, which well documented, of domestic violence from angry football fans who get drunk and go home and unfortunately beat their other halves. At no point was he endorsing it. It was just a comment on a social phenomenon and making light of the ridiculousness of that, rather than in any way saying it's okay. Or it seemed to me that in both these cases, one Labour, one Tory, a total mountain is being made out of a molehill, and these are often simple sort of expressions that people give in normal daily life, which are suddenly now making people unfit for public office.
I think that's absolutely right. And the Tory candidate that you mentioned is a very good example of this, because there are a number of interesting things about this case. Firstly, as you say, he was not justifying rape. He was not saying that women deserve to be raped if they take a particular course of action. He was simply saying what many fathers and mothers say to their daughters, their teenage daughters, don't get yourself into a particular situation. Men are a bit dodgy sometimes, especially if they've had a few drinks, and it might be wise to keep your distance. I mean, this is the kind of advice people have been given to their daughters for generations and generations. And he expressed that in a talk radio situation. So he said it in a kind of colourful way in 2014. He then apologised for it because it caused a fuss at the time. And still, you fast forward 5 years, and it's dug up once again. It's thrown at him like a rotten tomato, and he's cast out of political life, and he's no longer standing. And it's just this kind of incredibly unforgiving, shrill, censorious determination to expel anyone who's ever said anything in a particular way or expressed a controversial idea. And that's really dangerous for the parameters of public life and what people feel they can say.
Well, indeed, and again, we want people who've just been so squeaky clean or never made a comment. You're lucky you're not on Twitter, rather sensibly, I think. Goodness knows what they'll dredge up that I've had to say. But also, so much of it's taking things out of context. And yet, at the same time, voters constantly say they want politicians who are honest, and they want politicians who speak like them and who tell us what they really think, and then people are punished for it. I wonder though if this is actually a tiny little censorious minority who are doing the censoring on the rest of our behalf for the rest of us. Again, when I tweeted out about one of these cases, one of them I didn't tweet out about just because frankly I was busy with a daughter's birthday. It wasn't party political at all. But I've come to defence of people from various different parties over the years for making figures of speech, jokes, whatever, because I think this is ridiculous, and I want normal people to be able to express themselves in normal ways and not be punished for it. But it's amazing how often people want to take a very, very rigid party political line on these things.
Absolutely. And I think actually the key thing with all of this is to have some consistency. And if a Labour politician has been hammered for having said something in the past, or a Tory politician, it's important to take a stand on both of those and say, look, they're expressing an idea, they're expressing a view. It was a long time ago. Let's be a bit more forgiving. A really good example of this is, there's a lot that you could criticise Boris Johnson for, but people obsess over things he's written in newspaper columns going back years and years, and in some cases a decade or two, and they overlook the fact that he has certain views, he has certain policies, and there's this obsession with getting him over things he said. For example, even sensible things like his commentary on the niqab, which he said is an oppressive and ridiculous garment, but women should not be banned from wearing it. And I think he's absolutely right on that. But that gets thrown at him all the time, and it makes ordinary people feel that there are certain ideas you can't express, there are certain views you can't hold, and it does contribute. Even though I think you're right, this is a minority of censorious people, they have a big impact, and I think it contributes to a culture of conformity across society.